At her luxury winery, millionaire woman marries her mechanic, then priest reveals who he is. The golden hour sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of Sonoma County, California, where Victoria Ashworth's vineyard stretched as far as the eye could see. Rows upon rows of meticulously maintained grapevines created a natural cathedral, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. Today, this multi-million-dollar estate would witness something unprecedented in high society circles. Victoria Ashworth, heiress to the Ashworth wine empire, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her estate's main house, watching as staff members arranged white chairs in perfect rows among the vines. At 42, she commanded respect in boardrooms from Napa to New York, her family's wine label gracing the tables of presidents and celebrities alike. Her auburn hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her emerald eyes reflected both determination and nervousness. The guest list read like a who's who of California's elite. Tech moguls from Silicon Valley, Hollywood producers, old money families whose names adorned buildings throughout San Francisco, and wine industry titans who had known Victoria since she was a child running barefoot through these very vineyards. They had all come expecting to witness her marriage to someone from their world, perhaps the Harvard-educated son of another wine dynasty, or a successful entrepreneur who could match her business acumen. Instead, they would watch her marry Marcus Rodriguez, a 38-year-old mechanic who had arrived at the estate 6 months ago to repair her vintage Porsche and had somehow captured the heart of one of America's most eligible bachelorettes. Marcus stood in the estate's guest cottage, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. His weathered hands, permanently stained with motor oil despite scrubbing, trembled slightly as he smoothed down his dark hair. He had grown up in nearby Santa Rosa, the son of Mexican immigrants who had worked in vineyards like this one their entire lives, though never as owners. His father had taught him that honest work was noble work, and Marcus had built a successful auto repair business serving everyone from struggling college students to wealthy vintners who trusted him with their classic cars. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was marrying into the very world his parents had served. When Victoria's 1967 Porsche 911 had broken down on the winding roads near his shop, he had no idea that the frustrated woman in designer jeans and a silk blouse was worth more than his entire neighborhood. She had been different from his usual customers, no condescension, no impatience, just genuine curiosity about the car's restoration process. Their courtship had unfolded over months of return visits. Victoria would bring her various vintage cars for maintenance, lingering in his shop longer than necessary, asking questions about his work, his dreams, his perspective on life beyond the corporate boardrooms she inhabited. Marcus had shown her a world where success was measured not in stock portfolios, but in the satisfaction of fixing something broken, of creating beauty with one's hands. For Victoria, Marcus represented authenticity in a world of carefully orchestrated relationships. He saw her not as an heiress or a business acquisition, but simply as Victoria, a woman who laughed at his stories about difficult customers, who helped him organize parts in his shop, who shared his appreciation for the simple pleasure of a job well done. The engagement had sent shockwaves through high society. Victoria's mother, Catherine Ashworth, had practically fainted when informed that her daughter intended to marry the help. Family friends whispered about temporary insanity, about gold diggers and prenuptial agreements. Business associates questioned Victoria's judgment, wondering if this personal decision might affect her professional capabilities. But Victoria had weathered every storm of criticism with the same steely determination that had made her formidable businesswoman. She had seen enough loveless marriages among her peers' unions based on social compatibility and financial advantage rather than genuine affection. At 42, she knew what she wanted, and what she wanted was a partner who saw her as more than a balance sheet. As the afternoon wore on, guests began arriving in their luxury vehicles, Teslas and BMWs winding up the estate's cobblestone driveway. Women emerged in designer gowns that cost more than Marcus made in a month, their jewelry catching the late afternoon light. Men stepped out in perfectly tailored suits, their expressions ranging from curious to disapproving. The wedding party was small but telling. Victoria's maid of honor was her childhood friend Sarah, one of the few people in her circle who had embraced Marcus from the beginning. Marcus's best man was his younger brother Diego, a teacher who had watched his older brother find happiness in the most unexpected place. As the ceremony time approached, whispers rippled through the assembled crowd. Guests craned their necks to catch glimpses of the mechanic who had captured their hostess's heart. Some had met Marcus at various estate events over the past months. Victoria had made a point of including him in her social circle, testing the waters of acceptance. He had navigated these gatherings with quiet dignity, neither intimidated by wealth nor resentful of privilege, simply being himself in a world that often prized performance over authenticity. The officiant chosen for the ceremony was Father Miguel Santos, a priest from the local Catholic church where Marcus's family had worshipped for decades. Victoria, raised Protestant in the rarefied world of Episcopal services and charity galas, had agreed to a Catholic ceremony out of respect for Marcus's traditions. Father Santos was in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had made him beloved in the Latino community of Sonoma County. What the guests didn't know was that Father Santos carried a secret that would transform this already unconventional wedding into something truly extraordinary. The priest had arrived early, spending time in quiet conversation with both bride and groom. He had watched Victoria and Marcus together over the past months, had counseled them through the challenges of their cross-cultural, cross-class relationship. He had seen genuine love, mutual respect, and a commitment that transcended the superficial barriers that society had erected between them. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the wedding party took their positions. Victoria appeared at the top of the vineyard's gentle slope, a vision in ivory silk that caught the breeze and flowed around her like liquid starlight. Her dress was elegant but not ostentatious, chosen to complement the natural beauty of the vineyard setting rather than to make a statement about wealth or status. Marcus waited at the improvised altar, his face reflecting wonder and gratitude as he watched the woman he loved approach through the vines that had been in her family for 3 generations. The guests fell silent, their whispers stilled by the undeniable beauty of the moment. But as the ceremony began, as the ancient words of love and commitment were spoken in both English and Spanish to honor both families' traditions, none of the assembled guests could have imagined the revelation that Father Santos was preparing to share, a secret that would reframe everything they thought they knew about this unlikely union. Father Santos had reached the traditional moment in the ceremony where he would invite the couple to exchange their personal vows. The vineyard had fallen into that magical golden hour silence, with only the distant sound of wind through the grapevines and the soft rustle of expensive fabric as guests shifted in their seats. Victoria and Marcus stood facing each other, their hands joined, their eyes reflecting the deep love that had brought them to this moment, despite all the obstacles and social pressures they had faced. The priest smiled at them with genuine warmth, then turned slightly to address the gathered assembly. But instead of the expected transition to personal vows, Father Santos paused, his weathered hands gripping the edges of his prayer book. His expression grew contemplative, almost distant, as if he were reaching back through decades of memory. The assembled guests began to murmur softly, confused by the unexpected pause in the ceremony. Victoria and Marcus exchanged glances, wondering if the elderly priest was experiencing some kind of difficulty. Then Father Santos closed his prayer book and looked directly at Victoria, his eyes bright with an emotion that seemed to combine joy, sorrow, and something approaching wonder. he began to speak, his voice carrying clearly across the vineyard in the still evening air. What he revealed would shatter every assumption the wedding guests had made about this unlikely couple, and expose a truth that had been hidden for more than 4 decades. Father Santos disclosed that he had not always been a priest. In fact, he had once been Miguel Santos, a young vineyard worker who had labored in these very fields in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He had been barely 20 years old when he had begun working for Victoria's grandfather, old Thomas Ashworth, during the harvest seasons. The priest's voice grew softer as he revealed that during those long days in the vineyard, he had fallen deeply in love with Thomas Ashworth's daughter Catherine, who would later become Victoria's mother. Catherine had been home from college, young and beautiful, and full of dreams that seemed to have no place for a Mexican farm worker, with calloused hands and uncertain English. Their love affair had been conducted in secret, hidden from Catherine's family and from the rigid social expectations of the time. They would meet in the early morning hours before the workday began, or in the evening after the other workers had gone home. Miguel would bring Catherine wildflowers from the hills surrounding the vineyard, and she would share her dreams of travel, of literature, of a life beyond the constraints of her privileged upbringing. For one magical summer, they believed that love could conquer the seemingly impossible differences between their worlds. Catherine spoke of defying her family, of choosing love over social expectation. Miguel dreamed of proving himself worthy, of building something that could bridge the gap between their stations in life. But as autumn approached and Catherine prepared to return to college, reality intruded. Her father discovered their relationship and was furious beyond measure. Thomas Ashworth was a product of his time in class, unable to conceive of his daughter's future tied to a man he saw as beneath their family station. The confrontation was devastating. Thomas threatened to disown Catherine if she continued the relationship, and he fired Miguel immediately, with instructions never to return to the property. More devastating still, he used his influence throughout the county to ensure that Miguel could find no work at any of the established vineyards. Heartbroken and facing an uncertain future, Miguel made the most difficult decision of his young life. He left Sonoma County entirely, eventually making his way to Los Angeles, where he worked various jobs while wrestling with the pain of lost love and the sense of powerlessness that came from being dismissed so easily by those with wealth and influence. It was during this dark period that Miguel found his calling to the priesthood. The Catholic Church offered him purpose, community, and a way to serve others who, like himself, existed on the margins of society. He threw himself into his studies and his faith, eventually being ordained and spending decades serving Latino communities throughout California. Catherine, meanwhile, had submitted to family pressure and married a man her father deemed a proprietor, wine industry executive from a prominent family. This man became Victoria's father, though he had died when Victoria was still young, leaving Catherine a widow who had always carried the weight of wondering what might have been. Father Santos Miguel had never stopped loving Catherine, but he had found peace in his vocation and had assumed that their story was finished, a chapter of youth that had been closed forever. But when he had been reassigned to the parish in Sonoma County 3 years ago, fate had placed him back in the landscape of his first love. He had watched from a distance as Victoria built her life and her business, seeing in her the same strength and independence that had first attracted him to her mother. The priest revealed that when Marcus had approached him about performing the wedding ceremony, he had almost declined. The irony of the situation being asked to marry the daughter of his lost love to another working man who faced the same social barriers he once had seemed almost too painful to bear. But as he had gotten to know Victoria and Marcus, as he had counseled them through their engagement and seen the genuine love and respect they shared, Miguel had recognized something profound. In their union, he saw the possibility that love could indeed triumph over social prejudice, that the story he and Catherine had been unable to complete might find its resolution in the next generation. The priest's revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled wedding guests. Catherine Ashworth, seated in the front row, had gone pale, her hand pressed to her throat in recognition and shock. The society guests buzzed with whispers as the implications of this disclosure began to sink in. But Father Santos wasn't finished. He revealed that Victoria's choice to marry Marcus represented more than just personal love. It was a form of cosmic justice, a completion of a story that had been interrupted by prejudice and fear decades earlier. Victoria was marrying not just for herself, but in defiance of the same social barriers that had separated her mother from her first love. As the priest concluded his revelation, he looked directly at Catherine, his eyes filled with forgiveness and a kind of peaceful resolution. Then he turned back to Victoria and Marcus, his voice regaining its ceremonial authority as he prepared to complete the ceremony that would unite them not just as husband and wife, but as symbols of love's ultimate victory over social convention. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence, processing the extraordinary story they had just heard. Some wept openly at the romantic tragedy that had finally found its resolution. Others looked with new understanding at this marriage they had been prepared to dismiss as a mismatch. Victoria and Marcus, their hands still joined, exchanged vows, with even deeper meaning now, knowing that their love represented not just their own happiness, but the completion of a love story that had begun in these very vineyards more than 40 years ago. As Father Santos pronounced them husband and wife, as they kissed among the grapevines while the sun set behind the rolling hills of Sonoma County. There was a sense that this ceremony had healed old wounds while creating new possibilities. The reception that followed was unlike any society gathering the guests had ever attended. The revelation had broken down barriers, opened hearts, and created a celebration that honored both love's power and its persistence across generations. Catherine Ashworth approached Father Santos Miguel later in the evening, and their quiet conversation among the vineyard rows brought closure to a story that had shaped both their lives. They parted with forgiveness, understanding, and a shared joy in witnessing Victoria's happiness. Victoria and Marcus began their married life, knowing that their love had not only overcome the obstacles in their own path, but had somehow completed a circle of love that began before either of them was born. Their unlikely union had become a testament to the enduring power of authentic connection across all the artificial barriers that society creates. In choosing love over convention, Victoria had unknowingly fulfilled the dream that her mother had been too young and too frightened to pursue. And in the vineyard where it all began, surrounded by family and friends who had witnessed love's ultimate triumph, their story became legend.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.